All right, guys, welcome to another episode of, I guess it's not just the Protestant Libertarian podcast this time. We're doing a collaborative episode with my friends from the Legacy Right, Zach and Andrew. So, guys, good to have you here. I'm glad to be on your show, too.
Thank you. What's going on? How you doing?
Oh, doing pretty good, man. I'm glad we were able to make this work today.
I
Right?
just like the fact that we have the tri-state. We got two Northern Kentucky and Indiana going on near Cincinnati. I'm just glad that we finally got to do this.
Oh, I know. This was
Right.
great. And for like our listeners, we've been trying for the last couple of weeks, but everyone's got different working schedules and everything. So we were
hmm
finally able to make it happen. But I guess, just go ahead and introduce yourselves and what you guys do. I know that probably a lot of people listening to my show are familiar with you, but just tell us a little about your podcast.
Well,
Andrew,
my name is Andrew Joseph. We've been doing this for a couple of years now. We're just, trying to get off the ground and build a program and doing a little psychology research and a little economics and just a little entertainment and do what we can. So, Zach?
mostly entertainment. Mostly
Yeah.
entertainment. So, no, that's basically you hit it, you nailed it right there, Andrew. That's pretty much what we try to explore: psychology, social structures, culture, from a very anarchist perspective, but still, I mean, it's out there for everybody. Or at least that's what we want to try to get it out there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I love it. Well, gentlemen, I think the reason why we convene this interview today or this meeting today is because we want to talk about the public school system. And I'm a public school teacher. I've talked to my audience about this several times before. I've done a few episodes on it, but I've not really gotten into the nitty gritty. And I know that you guys wanted to talk about it, so we can take this direction in whatever way you want to go. And we have like a whole hour to break this down. So I guess maybe to start, just like, you guys were public school students too, weren't you? What was that like for you guys?
Yeah. Well, I remember being in school in Kentucky, just growing up, seeing students just being passed along that were obviously failing and it needed to stay back because the teacher just didn't want to put up with them, and that's a complete capitulation in my book for their potential. You're not pushing them to be responsible and mature. You're just passing the buck along to the next teacher and say, "Oh well." But what do you think, Zach?
Mhm. I've had both my feet in private and public, specifically Catholic schools. And as far as like education, depends on where you're at and what type of school you are in. But I would say that like Catholic schools, especially at my Catholic high school that I went to for a year, education wise, it's a lot better because people put in, you get what you put in. Tuition's high, obvious, but it's the same structural mechanisms just as public school. You're still going to have the same infighting. You're still going to have the same struggles culturally with students. You're going to have this authority up on everybody that teachers are going to try to promote and faculty. So like, I mean, I'll come at it like culturally. I didn't mind learning a little bit of what public school gave me. Educationally, I do like what private school education can give you if you put forth the effort and actually pay attention. So it's a little, back and forth to me when it comes to the education system.
Yeah, well, I think you're right, though, because one of the problems with public education, and this is something that it doesn't matter what your political perspective is, if you're in
hmm
if you're in the line of work that I'm in, everyone is aware that this is a problem. As the legislative structure of public education has changed,
hmm
it's become more and more difficult to discipline students in school. And so no matter how bad you are, no matter how much you are disruptive in class or harass other students, it's almost impossible to remove these kids from school for any extended period of time, whereas you don't get that with private schools. Like if someone comes into a private school and they're chronically disruptive, then you can just kick them out and they're done, and that's the end of the story. And I think that that's a huge advantage that private schools have over public schools. I mean, I've met a lot of private schools teachers. I think they're just as qualified and competent as public school teachers. And
hmm
if you happen to get lucky enough to live in a zip code where you're sent to a high performing school, you're probably going to get a pretty good education in the public education system. But if you're not,
Oh
then
yeah.
you have to deal with all of those disruptions. And that's one of the huge advantages that private schools have over public schools.
Yeah, and I think you think about that's consequentialism, right? Is that if you're not, like you said, you're not putting in the effort, you're gonna really bite the bullet and have to struggle to get in the future because of it. So
Yeah. And they will. I mean, man, I tell this story quite a bit because I have some of these kids every single year. But like the worst one that I had this student 3 years ago who was in my third period class, and he was never a behavior problem. The kid didn't hardly talk at all. But what he did every day was he came into class and he sat next to the wall and he just stared at the wall all day. He refused to do work, never, wouldn't take the test, wouldn't do any of the assignments. And I mean, like at the end of the school year, he had a single digit grade in my class, averaging all 4 quarters, and he moved on to 8th grade, no problems. The only way that you can hold a student back is if the parents consent to it. But we're doing these kids, I think, a huge disservice by allowing them to come in every single day, do absolutely no work at all, and then move up to the next level along with all the kids that worked and put in all the effort all year long. It's just wild to see that happen.
Yeah, it is. It's very fascinating. I mean, I got a story on that one, just being one that went to private Catholic high school freshman year and then came back to public school to finish out. And first off, my grades slipped because I didn't care. Secondly, by the time I got to senior, because I didn't try, because it was just so doggone easy and stupid that it was just, that's the word. It was stupid. I was bored. I'd rather write stories and raps and not pay attention and get into trouble outside of school. But I digress. So, but I noticed, and so did my mom, when I got to senior year, that I was taking, because I really didn't put forth the effort, I ended up taking almost the same coursework that I took when I was a freshman as a senior. It's like, well, that's not really gonna, when you look at it like that, you start realizing, well, that's not helping anybody. That's actually holding them back academically and intellectually. Like, luckily it was me, because as I get into life, I'm going to try to fulfill and try to embrace myself. But what about somebody that's not me? What if they just don't care? And I mean, and then you flip the script on them. They're just going to think that they're stupid. And then you end up getting into this cycle of where you get into trouble, you get into crime. Because just like Immortal Technique says, I mean, if you don't amount to shit, excuse my language,
You're good.
prison becomes retirement.
Yeah.
And I mean, in a way, it's shifting the foundation that you're standing on from concrete or hard ground and just something like quicksand. And you're going to learn, but it's going to be, like what Zach said, it's delayed. So that means that you're at a disadvantage. You're just in a long line of people who are still at a disadvantage, who are trying to get ahead and maintains that level of stability. And because it's designed to make it harder and harder for you to maintain that stability, from my perspective.
No, I totally agree with that. And the thing about the public education system is that they're all concerned, like the system itself is concerned with like kind of facile diversity. So they are really interested in, gender, race, religion, like that is what they are looking for when they seek diversity in their schools. However, they never take into consideration the fact that students have diverse interests and not all students learn in the same way. And so public school is kind of like this monolithic, uniform institution that everyone has to conform to, regardless of your natural aptitudes. And I remember, like, when I was in high school, I was fortunate enough to be in a district that had a vocational school, and it was actually on the campus of my high school. And so I had a lot of kids that, like, I had a lot of friends that I knew in 8th grade that just like hated being in school because it offered nothing for them. And their parents were like blue collar working people. They were in the trades or mechanic, whatever it might be. But a lot of them, man, as soon as they started going to this vocational school on campus, they fell in love with learning because they were learning to do something that interested them and that was practical. And so many of those kids graduated high school at 18 with certifications and then went out and immediately got jobs and started working and made a decent living. And a lot of those kids were extremely successful because we gave them an opportunity to pursue something that they were interested in. Whereas, like, in most districts, and this is true in the district that I work in now, we don't have those alternatives for students that don't want to be in a conventional classroom. And like, for real, I work in a blue collar school, and a lot of my kids' parents are in the trades. Like, if your dad's a plumber and you know that you're going to grow up and inherit the family business, you're going to make over 6 figures a year. What point is there for you to learn algebra 2 and, advanced science? You don't need any of that stuff to be a successful adult. So why should we force kids to do it? It just doesn't make any sense.
Right.
Yeah, at that point,
And
you just need basic math.
Yeah.
I've went to I'm not, it's just how it is, but I moved around a lot during high school, and I went to 7 high schools in 5 different states. Okay. And the quality and difference between the teachers, just in each subject, was outrageous. It was like me and Zach went to high school together for a short while, and one of our English teachers, she just pushed the coursework to try to get the best out of us, because if you're really participating and contributing, to the coursework, then you're going to learn a lot. And then you go to the next school.
Which teacher was that? I think
I
I know
can't
who you're
remember
talking
her
about.
name. Yeah, but
I think it might have been Miss Britton.
yeah, that was, it
Yeah.
was Miss Britton. But then I moved to a different school, and it was like, okay, whatever, we're just going to watch a movie. And that's a real, it really, there's no standards, there's no foundation. It's totally decentralized, and we want that in some aspects. But if you're on a public school system, then there's no accountability at all. We're supposed to be trying to establish something here for these people, but it's just getting worse and worse because there's no motivation.
Yeah.
Well, I think there's no accountability, mainly because schools have become, regardless of whether it's public, but mainly because it's public or private, a lot of kids are just being rushed off into the system, so to speak, private or public, so that because parents have to work. I mean, private, it's a little bit better because at least you have a family that's more well off. So I mean, at that point, they're at least getting an education. But school in all standards has become pretty much daycare.
Yeah. No, I mean, you're completely correct. And it's kind of like what you were saying, Andrew. Like, you basically have to get lucky and wind up in a good school if you want to get a quality education. And you think about it, like, we have open enrollment in my school. So theoretically, if you want to send your kid to a certain school in the district, you can apply for it and send them there, but you have to provide transportation. And it just so happens that, like, the school that I work at, we're the highest performing middle school in the district, which is, it's great. And we have a great culture there. And so it's a good environment to work in. But like, in my where we live in the county, my daughter would go to that middle school no matter what, because we're in district. But like 2 streets over from us, the kids that live there get sent to a different middle school that's not high performing, and those kids have a completely different experience. And the only factor that contributes to that is that they happen to live about 500 yards away from this imaginary line that the school district drew. And it's just so unfortunate that it has to be like that.
Well, I mean, I think if you had more, I know that this is the pipe dream right now, but if you have more private schools, the cost comes down. I mean, that's just basic economics, right? It's really about trying to cultivate an environment, a territorial environment that will promote that and that will make the options better and cheaper. I mean, that's just how economics works, right? So, and we're talking about education, which is one of the most important things that you can have, as a measure for success in life.
And to keep it on a real sense, since we live in reality, I mean, we want the perfect thing would be just to privatize it all, let the market dictate, but we don't live in that world. So the other access would be, just like you said, Alex, you work in a district where they have a proposed school choice. That would be the standard that we need to kind of reflect. Is we need to allow for school choice, forget about districting. Excuse me, I can't talk, I guess, today, and allow for parents to choose where they want to send their kids. Let the market dictate, even in a public sector, and then that can also help relieve some decision making and taxpayer appropriation with property tax as well, because then maybe you can kind of rescind a little bit on property tax, maybe give parents in their properties incentives, maybe pull out of forcing people to pay for certain districts that if they're sending their kid to another district because of school choice, and then reflect their appropriations to that district instead for where they're sending their kid to. And we can fix things through just the movement of money. I mean, effectively in this public sector system.
Yeah, and
And
that's why.
and
Oh yeah, go ahead,
sorry,
Andrew.
I was gonna say, you talking about the movement of money. I think, especially considering a majority of education is driven by taxpayer dollars, right? If you can really shore up that money and make it expensive for them to operate, and like they actually feel the heat of consequences, you're gonna get a kick in the butt, and you're gonna improve, at least in a short period of time, the perspective of why they're there and why the students need to work. Because if you can't guarantee things in the future, you're adjusting the time preference. The people that are running the show above the teachers are gonna get the heat on it.
Yeah, and that's where, unfortunately, a lot of the money that's spent on public education goes to those people and not actually to the students and the teachers and the individual schools. It goes to the bureaucracy, which is really unfortunate. But that's where I think kind of like a cross-county voucher system would be really good within a state. So what's funny is that like our district, they really tout the fact that we have an open enrollment process so that parents do have a little bit of choice within our district. But then whenever the state legislature comes up with a bill or proposal to try to make school choice universal within the state of Kentucky, our district reacts to that in a negative way because they don't want kids leaving our district and going to a different district. But it's going back to what you guys said. We understand these basic economic principles of competition. If you give a student a voucher and say you can go to any state you want in Kentucky, as long as you can find transportation to get there every day, you pick the best ones, then kids are going to gravitate towards the better schools. And then you have to go back to these other schools and say, well, what is it about the culture in this particular school that is making it difficult for parents to want to send their kids there, and how can we improve in those areas? It really does expose some of those problems. Now, I do think that a lot of the problems are more systemic than that, but that would be a good step in the right direction, and it would at least show you which schools were doing a good job and which schools were underperforming.
Right. Another thing to think about is, I mean, I'm not an expert in this. I'm just spitballing here. It's such a concise time frame that students go to school nowadays. If you're going to a different county, maybe loosen up, like have 2 shifts for teachers, and the students can come and they still have the same kind of time frame, but instead of coming in at 8 a.m., come in at 10 and then leave a couple hours. That way you have that leverage and availability to maybe go a couple counties over to that better school.
Well, another thing is the older you get, it should be the exact opposite. The younger kids should be starting a little earlier, and the older kids should be starting later. That way, it gives them some room to actually get the best sleep that they can possibly get. Because I mean, we were all young once. We don't go to bed at the right time. Like we're going to bed at 2 o'clock in the morning, playing video games and texting with our girlfriends till 2, 3 in the morning, and then have to be up at school at 7:30. I mean, it doesn't work.
Yeah.
So,
and I mean, and there are, and someone will have to fact check me and find the data, but there have been some studies done on this because there are a few school districts that have that graded scheduling for schools to where they've actually flipped it around and the older students don't go in until later. And I'm pretty sure, again, someone needs to fact check me, but I'm pretty sure based on the research that's been done that it's been shown to have some effectiveness. Like that does seem to work.
Well, another thing is maybe you could loosen up the territorial barriers between like elementary, middle school, and high school, because there are students who are literally being held back because they are so intelligent, but they feel like it would be weird for them to be ahead of the other people their age. So if you have to have that mix up a little bit, it would be a little easier for them to be able to accelerate up the card of education.
Yeah.
are you saying it's not like the movies or Young Sheldon? The
Something like that.
intelligent people actually go backwards?
Well, I mean,
I feel
Yeah, well, man, I mean, again, I experience this all the time. It's really frustrating to me because ever since No Child Left Behind, which was passed into law by the Bush
Hmm.
administration in 2002, the entire public, like the entire federal accountability framework, has been geared around math and language arts common assessments at the end of every school year. So what's happened in the last 23 years since the passing of No Child Left Behind is that the entire American education system has been funneled into making sure that our students perform well on those end of the year common assessments to
Yep.
meet federal benchmarks in order to receive that federal funding. That's their quote unquote accountability measures. So what'll happen in like middle school, where I teach, is that they have differentiated math and language arts classes, and this isn't by any means perfect, but they at least put kids that perform at a similar level in certain classes together. That way, if you have a
Hmm.
class full of students that are generally lower, you can offer them additional instruction, and if you have a class of students that are generally higher, then you can push them a little bit further, and that works to a certain degree. They do not do that for social studies, which I teach, or science. And so we have classes where we have students from all ability levels. And I'm not joking about this. Like, I have classes where there are kids that could probably be doing social studies work on a 10th or 11th grade level. And then in the same class, there's a student that can't read. And I have to figure out a way to teach all of those kids. And what is really frustrating is that the kids that are on the very bottom, I don't have the ability to give them the support that they need to make it to the next level. And the kids that are at the very top, they're just bored because what we're doing is too easy for them and they need something a
Hmm.
little more difficult. But if you have 33 kids in a classroom and you have that wide range, you have to shoot towards the middle. And then that way, yeah, we really are holding our highest performing kids back, especially in social studies and science, because we just don't offer any other programs for them. And again, all of this is just because state district, like state departments of education are chasing federal dollars. That's really what this all comes down to. It's all about a money game, and it's not about the students or their success at all.
How do we
What do you
fix
think
that?
about what do you think about the pivoting and them shutting down the federal, student the Trump shutting down the Department of Education? Sorry.
Yeah, Zach, I see you're shaking your head there.
It's
Tell me what
it's
you think
not
about that.
it's not happening. They're talking, but they're not going to do it. Everything that they do right now is they talk. They're doing it to posture themselves, but they're not going to do. They may make certain cuts, but they're not going to eliminate it like they should.
Yeah. Well, and a
Well,
part of that is because it would require an act of Congress for them to eliminate it. And we know
That
how
too.
spineless Congress is. They're never going to do anything that would be deemed unpopular. I
Hmm.
do think with the executive order to which Trump's executive order last week doesn't eliminate the Department of Education. It gave a directive to Linda McMahon, who's the education secretary, to begin drafting plans for eliminating the Department of Education. Now,
Hmm.
you guys are both right. We're not really going to get rid of it. What's going to happen is a lot of the programs will be funneled off to other federal agencies. And while the Department of
Yep.
Education will not exist in name, it will still exist in theory. Now, there will be several thousand bureaucrats that we won't have to pay. So there's, I guess, a marginal savings there. I think that the best thing that could come out of that, and this is Trump's plan, is that it wouldn't actually decrease educational spending, but it would send basically block grants of money to the states from the federal government. And if we can do that without there being any sort of assessment strings attached to it, that would at least give states a little bit more flexibility to determine curriculum and come up with programs that aren't just geared towards meeting those federal guidelines. Now, even that tiny little incremental step forward would be beneficial for our students, but it all remains to be seen whether there's actually a political will to do that. And this Trump 2.0 administration, they talk a great game, but every time there's actual like legislative accomplishments that they could
Mm.
achieve, they fail. And so I don't think that I'm very skeptical that anything's actually going to
Hmm.
change.
yeah.
Yeah,
Well, you shouldn't look
a
to
lot of that. No, go ahead,
should,
Andrew.
you shouldn't look to Washington for a solution. You should look for a way to get out of their influence.
Yeah.
That's
I'm gonna crunch. I'm gonna crunch big time on what Mike Decentralized is. Follow him on X to Free Mike. Also, Town Liberation. But and he even has a book that kind of goes down to it. We need to return back to common sense on the matter that we need to open up back to our communities. Our locality needs to take a hold, and you're not getting anything done by eliminating federal overreach or even state overreach unless the local populace works together in tandem, getting rid of the divide in politics and gets back to common sense regulatory output for their communities.
Yeah, it's got to be done on a local level. And I think, again, this is one of the things that I always come back to with education. The further down the chain these decisions about what's taught in school can be made, then the better it's going to be for our students. And like, I mean, I have some very perceptive kids that ask me about this, and I kind of tell them the same thing every time. It's like, if you think about the even just looking at this from a philosophical or worldview perspective, the majority of the politicians and bureaucrats that go to Washington, D.C. come from big cities. And so their entire perspective on what our country needs is based on their urban environment, right? And so they're bringing that with them. And unfortunately, when you have a one size fits all bureaucracy like the Federal Department of Education, it's all run by urbanites that have a certain perspective about what our students ought to learn based on their urban context. The reality is, though, is that they have no idea what it's like to live a suburban or a rural lifestyle. And so they wind up making decisions that are in the interest of people that are like them instead of in the interest of people that are like the majority of the Americans. So the further down the chain you go, you abolish the Department of Education and you leave it up to the states. Well, you might still have a big state Department of Education, but at least they have a better idea of the kinds of students that they have in their state that Washington insiders don't have. And then if you could devolve it down even further to just the counties or the local districts, well, then you really know what kind of skills your kids need in the classroom. And that gives you an opportunity to tailor your educational curriculum to the specific needs of those students. Because the reality is that some kid that's growing up in the hood in the inner city has a very different set of needs than a kid that's growing up in a holler somewhere in the mountains. And it's the same is true of whether you live in a suburb. It doesn't matter. Like kids that are in different places with different economic context and different prospects for work have different educational needs. And the more that we can decentralize the education system, the more effective it will be for us to meet those needs. And that's it's just like common sense. But a lot of people have a hard time making that connection.
What do you think about people bringing in like police officers into this education environment and trying to, culture them through the police departments and stuff like that? I saw, it's been a while, but I saw something about them that they're trying to like basically implement social pressure as like a trust mechanism for police. Is that something that you've seen?
I mean, we have a student resource officer at our school, and he's a really nice
Yeah.
guy, and he's just there to keep the kids safe. I'm sure that there are some schools where they do that, but this is another thing with the public schools is they very much encourage kids to go and get jobs in the public sector, right? Because it's a public sector organization. And so, yeah, I mean, even like with whether it's like ROTC or whatever it might be, like we're encouraging these kids like go and work for the government because it's a good job. And I mean, that in and of itself, as we all know, is kind of a problem. It's just like, it's like a form of intellectual incest in that way. Okay, yeah, we work for the state too, so we're going to benefit by expanding the size and the power of the state. So our students should go and work for the states too, and we should kind of legitimize that as a career path that many people should take. And yeah, I mean, I agree. I think that'd be a huge problem.
They're not wrong though. Government jobs are probably the best job. They're the cushiest. They're easy for the most part. There are some hard, stressful reasons why one would not want to jump into the government, but it is quite easy because it's there.
Right.
It's almost like it's infinite. So there's always going to, as long as there's a government and as long as they can steal money from us or print more money, they can, there's going to be a job.
Yeah. And I always feel like that gets worse the higher up the chain that you go. So like, I know a ton of great police officers and teachers and firefighters and people like that are really dedicated to their job, but they're dedicated because they're passionate about it, right? Like they really want to make a difference. There are people that are not dedicated and they know that you can kind of just show up and get a free ride, which is a huge problem. And we were talking about that before. I think tenure is a large part of that as well. But it's like the further up the bureaucracy you go, and we see this in education too, the less of an incentive there is to provide value for the taxpayers that are actually funding you, and the more of an incentive there is to protect your own institutional credibility. And I look at like the superintendent of my school district makes $290,000 a year, which is $100,000 increase from what he was making in 2019. And I can say with 100% certitude that our school district absolutely failed during the COVID pandemic. So why is it that our superintendent's making $100,000 more now than he was before the pandemic? And like, we just continue to add all of these positions to our central office. All of these positions average about $85,000 a year. The average family income income in my county is $79,000 a year. So one bureaucrat's making more than most two-parent families in the county, and none of it makes sense. And the thing that really sucks about this is that that's what they're spending money on. Like they're not spending money on textbooks. They're not spending money on our students. They're not doing anything to actually improve the schools. It's about all of these bureaucratic jobs and bureaucratic positions and bureaucratic work that is designed to, it's essentially the public education bureaucracy is a make work program. There's no real work to be done. None of these jobs are really that valuable. They're not worth $85,000 a year to the taxpayer, but they come up with all of these programs to justify their position. And that's just a huge problem. And you're right. It is like being an education bureaucrat is one of the easiest jobs in the world because you can literally do nothing and fail all the time. And you're still going to make a great salary off of the public. And there's no chance that you're ever going to lose your job. It's such a racket, you know?
Meanwhile, teachers, it seems to me, and obviously you, Alex, you have your foot in the door there, but as far as teachers, pay wise, job wise, what is the culture like for teachers in the public school sector?
Well, I mean, I think a lot of it depends on where you're at. Fortunately, being in a state like Kentucky, most of even the colleagues that I have that would vote Democrat are still pretty like they're still pretty like culturally conservative, you know. And everyone that I talk to, you know, they don't have. The problem is that they don't have libertarian theory. So they see all of these problems that are taking place in the public school system and they get it, like they get it, but they don't have any sort of unifying theory to explain why this is happening and come up with solutions that actually make sense. I do think that pretty much everyone that I work with understands that the bureaucracy is reckless and out of control and that they're wasting our money. In general, I feel like most of us believe that we're being paid fairly. I mean, I think that there are definitely ways around the margins that we can make that that money spent a lot more effectively. But like everyone sees that the money's being drained to the top, and that's the way that it's going. Yeah. It's just a matter of trying to help people understand that there is kind of there's an economic and a political theory that explains all of this. But some of the consequences of that theory might push you in directions that you never intended to go, and that's the really scary part for a lot of people, because once you start kind of unraveling the okay, so we know that like the education bureaucracy at the local level, like our county bureaucrats are as corrupt as can be and don't use money effectively. Well, what does that say about our state Department of Education? What does that say about the federal Department of Education? What does that say about the USAID would be a great example of that, or the FDA, or all of these other agencies? And then once you start realizing that these bureaucracies don't do any of the things that they're actually intended to do, then you have to start questioning the entire system. So there are a lot of people that have woken up, though. I mean, I think that they're like the teachers that I know are willing to ask harder questions about why the system doesn't seem to be working for our students now than ever before. And I think that that's a positive. I just hope that we can capitalize on that.
Well, I mean, another thing is, how do you control the impulsive behavior of some people who are like the middleman, right? If there's no counterfactual, somebody putting the pressure on them, where do you expect to go? So
yeah, I mean, and you guys understand this too. I mean, most of what is done by the Board of Education and by the local school bureaucracy is done more or less in darkness. I mean, it's technically public, but the public isn't that invested in it because they pay their taxes. They don't really realize what their money is going towards. And I do think COVID was a big turning point, because for the first time, these parents got to see what it was like inside of the classrooms of their students, because they were doing school virtually at home, and they realized, oh, this is not really what I thought it was. And so I really do think that the only way that we can actually make a positive change is just by explaining to people, like, this is what your money is being spent on, and it's not going towards the things that you say that you care about. As these people that are online defending the public education system, they always defend like kind of the noble aspects of it. We need to educate our kids, and we need to make sure that those that are disadvantaged have, you know, an opportunity to have an education. But what they never do is track down where all of these dollars are actually going. And it's the majority of it is actually going to the bureaucracy and not to the students or teachers. And we just have to make people aware. And it's honestly, it's a pretty easy sell, regardless of your political persuasion, to just say, hey, look, our district's spending, you know, this amount of millions of dollars on this initiative. How does that help your kid? And then when they're like, well, it doesn't really help my kid at all. And then you're like, okay, well, then we need to do something about this. Like we need to put pressure on these people to start spending our money more responsibly. But we're never going to get any changes if we try to implement these. And it's kind of like going back to what you guys were saying about Trump. Like if they nominally abolish the Department of Education, is that a net positive? Yes. It's a very marginal net positive. The only way that we're ever going to affect change is from the bottom up. We have to start at the local level and try to convince people that these systems don't work the way that they're advertised.
Well, the people that are at the top, I mean, they have time to wait. Okay.
Oh yeah.
Think about what happened. Like you said, during COVID, and a little after, is that people were trying to actually, interject into the education system, and the FBI was sent after them. They say, "Oh yeah, this is a new FBI. This is a new FBI," but 6 years from now, right? Is it not going to go back to the same way it was, because there's not so much? You already see signs of it now when they're like, "Oh, we're just trying to spin it so that we can save image or save face for while we're launching attacks over in the Middle East."
Yeah,
they're not going away. So how do you address that concern?
Yeah,
and speaking of misappropriation and the top getting fatter and the bottom getting a little leaner, Kentucky has had this problem for decades now, and it came to a boiling point under what was his name? Oh, Matt Bevin.
Oh yeah.
Now, but with the pension. How do we fix that scenario with the pensions and the teachers union and the education system? Where does that all coordinate together when it comes to our education system?
Yeah, again, I think that's going to have to be another change that takes place from the bottom up. The pension, that's the third rail in education, because even like, this is the thing that's so frustrating to me about that is, well, one, I think that these state pensions are basically a Ponzi scheme. They're spending the money that we're contributing now, and there's no guarantee that we're going to get it in the future. So it is like in the purest sense, it's a Ponzi scheme, but it's also welfare for middle class people, because you work your 27 years and then you basically get $3,000 a year for the rest of your life on the taxpayer expense. It's a huge problem economically. And it's funny how we have all of these like conservative teachers in Kentucky that are like, man, the welfare state is so wrong, and all it does is enable people. We need to curb back all these privileges, but then they want their pensions, which is just a form of state welfare. So I think that it's kind of, and this is something that I've been kind of, and I take flack for this stuff because I'm pretty open about these positions at school, because they're irrefutable. Like when you explain it to someone, they can't, there's no counter argument to the fact that if you want to live on pension for 50 years, that you're a welfare recipient and you should be treated as such morally, I think. I think that they're like teachers within the system that don't believe in these policies have to be able to speak up. Like we have to step up and say, look, this is wrong and here's why. And then this all comes back to the public. We know, because we're libertarians, that government is an illusion. Like it doesn't actually exist. It's just men with guns forcing a much larger group of people to comply with their dictates. But the moment that the public stops believing in their power, then government's gone. And so like if we all woke up tomorrow morning and said, no, we're not going to pay our property taxes anymore, and we're not going to send our kids to your public schools until you get rid of all of these bureaucrats, reform the pension system, and actually make some economically responsible decisions, then it's done. Like it's gone there, and there's nothing that anyone could do about it. There's no amount of force that they could apply on us if everyone just woke up tomorrow and said, we're not doing this anymore. And so getting more and more people to opt out of the system or to challenge the system, that's the only way that we're ever going to fix it. And I do think that there is a certain, like, we need to stigmatize pension culture. I think that if you're a public employee, you don't just get to work your 27 years and then live off of the public for the rest of your life. Like we should stigmatize that as people. We should call it out for what it is. And then we should make better economic arguments for how we can solve this. Like one of the things that I go back to is that like 13% of our income as teachers, so we have our salaries, but 13% of that is rolled into the pension system. Well, just let teachers opt out. And if you want to take your 13% and invest it in a private retirement account, that's great. If you choose not to do that and you get to the end of a career and you haven't saved anything for retirement, that's your fault. Like, that's not the public's responsibility to take care of you as an elderly person. It's your responsibility as an individual. And I think that alone, just giving teachers the ability to, the mechanism to opt out of that system and fund their retirement on their own, is probably going to be the best way to do that. And if we can help explain to more and more teachers that these public pensions can default. Like, there's a very, and especially going back to what you were saying earlier, Zach, about the government just printing more and more money, there's a very real possibility that the US dollar will not exist in the form that it does now in 30 years. And so it doesn't matter what the state has promised you in terms of pension. If we wind up in hyperinflation and the dollar loses all of its value, your pension's worthless anyways. And so we should have these checks in place. So just trying to explain these basic concepts to people, having those outside of the school system put pressure on the school system to reform, and having teachers that have like conservative or libertarian leanings being willing to step up and make these unpopular arguments within the institutions. That's, I think, the only real way that we're going to change it, short of a full-scale economic collapse.
I think the capitulation is the healthiest. It's the most painful, but it's the healthiest way for you to get actual, real, effective change. And, you know, if you can look for people that are impulsive psychologically, you can definitely weed them out. And that's going to, I mean, it's not going to be popular, but you can look what happened. It's because you were so impulsive that you're, you know, people are suffering, and there was no responsibility here. You need the engineers. You don't need the party guy.
Yeah.
I don't think we have 30 years either. I think we have maybe 2.5 if we're lucky with the dollar.
Yeah, I'm kind of worried that that's going to be the case as well. They just can't stop. They can't stop spending, and we like, the debt's just going to continue to grow. I don't see how the dollar remains viable. And if it's true that the BRICS countries are going to come together and create a gold-backed currency, that could easily become the default world reserve currency, and the dollar's done. And then, like, again, you know, we'll have people rioting in the streets because they're not getting their welfare checks, and the defense contractors aren't going to be getting their contracts anymore, and the pensioners aren't going to. But like, if the dollar's done, it's done, and there's nothing we can do about it. Like, and people don't understand just how serious and plausible that scenario is.
Well, I mean, it does help the problem. It's not popular, but it does help the problem, because there actually is pressure for you to, you know, to move the earth and, you know, modernize.
Yeah. Well, and that's what, like, you know, we have our libertarian dreams and our theories and all that stuff, but living in the real world, we're never going to abolish the public school system. But I do think that if there was a giant economic collapse and the system was shaken up, we would have a chance to rebuild it from the ground up and probably make it a lot more effective than it is now. And the goal should not be, and this is kind of where, like, I get frustrated with some libertarians who are kind of like, they just don't want to engage in the real world. There are ways to reform these systems that make them better for the taxpayers. And instead of saying, well, you know, we're just going to complain about it until we can abolish it, we can actually make some real positive changes, and we can advocate for policies that return more money to the local level and the taxpayers and provide more value for our students and their parents. Again, all these things that we've been discussing would do that. Getting rid of teacher tenure is a really easy way to make it difficult for underperforming teachers to just maintain their jobs indefinitely without having to perform. That would be a really easy step in the right direction. Putting caps on the number of bureaucrats that a district can hire, the amount of money that a district can spend on bureaucrats, that would be a huge step forward. There's all kinds of ways that we can improve the system. It's just finding the political will to do so.
Well,
I think we should take you want to go first, Andrew? We've been going in a circle. Go ahead.
Yeah, that's fine. I was just thinking, you know, I don't remember these. It was from back in the day. Stop quoting laws. We have swords. If you have territory, right, that's neutral and it's out of the realm of the control. So not the United States, but look what, like I was saying about the thing about BRICS, right? They're putting pressure on them to modernize because there's other people that have a stronger foundation for people to build off of. You have all these countries around the world that are neutral in the fact that they have other interests that they're not interested in. If you can go and build there, you're not only building a better environment on other parts of the world, but you're also making, you know, people wake up in the United States. They go, well, we actually had to compete. We actually had to produce something instead of just living off of the rest of the world,
Right.
buying our crap.
That's
Yep.
what tariffs are for.
Yeah, right.
No, but
Yeah.
one thought that I was gonna bring up is perhaps we need to look at the Amish as an example on how they conduct their education system. It's a little collectivist to a certain extent, and they don't really treat individual concepts to its fullest extent, but they do have their own schools. It's one room, everybody's together. They teach the bare minimum of what you need, and then after 8th grade, you're done.
Yeah.
And I think what we could do is we could implement that, not necessarily putting everybody together, but perhaps drawing all grade levels kind of down to meet each other, because maybe 8th or 9th grade should be that sweet spot, or perhaps 6th grade, or maybe who knows, however you want to deal with it, and let secondary education be secondary education in a voluntary standard. If you want to go further academically, then make that choice, open up the marketplace of ideas and the marketplace of schools. Sort of how universities are kind of set up now. Of course, there's so much public money and subsidy, and
Right.
student loans are, I mean,
And
it poisons it, but at least you have that aspect of a marketplace of ideas post 8th grade and or so on, and then let the kids that don't have a niche for academia um, go forth and apprentice, go
Yeah.
into the trades, go work on the farm with mom and dad or grandpa or whatever.
yeah, there's a shelf life, right, to education. Some people don't need to go all the way through high school. Some people they're geared in a specific way to just, okay, this is enough. I can make it. Other people they'll really advance. But real quick, the quote I was talking about was from Pompey.
Yeah. Well, oh no, do you have the quote?
Stop quoting laws to men who carry swords.
Oh, yes, yes.
Hmm.
No, I'm really glad to hear you guys say that, though, because this is something that I've been arguing for the last couple of years as well. Of course, the education bureaucracy would suffer massive financial loss because of this, but it would make it better for the taxpayers themselves. 8th grade should be the
Hmm.
end of compulsory school. If we're going to send students to school and we're going to force them to do so, then 8th grade should be the end of it for students to have an aptitude in learning and that want to go on learning in a professional classroom environment. Then those are the ones that go to high school. Everybody else can go and find a job and start getting on the job training. And then they have a couple of years to get
Hmm.
real experience, get those certifications in. And then again, like it's like my friends that went to vocational school in high school, when they're 18 years old, they already have everything they need to go out and be successful in the professional world. That would be so much
Hmm.
better. And it's sad, like for me as a teacher, because I watch some of these kids just languishing. They're bored to death. They don't care about learning any of this stuff. They underperform. But if they were given something that they could do, and then also like, hey, you're 14 years old, you can go out and get a paycheck now, that would completely change their view on the world. And instead, what we do is we force them to go to school for 4 more years where they're just going to be bored out of their mind. They're going to wind up getting into trouble. And it's actually going to make it harder for them to be successful in the long run because they won't have the chance to develop the skills they need early. And I think that we're doing our kids a huge disservice by forcing them all down the exact same path. I mean, again, from a statist utilitarian argument, you can make the case that students need to learn how to, do basic math, read, learn the basic tenets of history and civics, and learn rudimentary
Hmm.
science. Okay, we can make that argument from a utilitarian standpoint. And I think even in a free market of education, all students, regardless of which school you sent your kid to, would have to learn those basics. But once you're done with that, like the sky's the limit. You can do whatever. You should be able to do whatever you want and pursue your own interest. And that should be something that we accept as a society, and instead of keeping kids trapped in basically these prisons for additional years after 8th grade.
I've
Do
seen
they
a
even
video
teach?
by Aaron
Oh,
Clary, real quick, and he was talking about maybe once you're out of middle school, drop out of high school immediately, get a GED, and instead of going through the 4 years of high school, once you get the GED, go straight into community college, and by the time you're in through community college, you're going straight to college. I mean, people
Mhm.
just get to high school. I mean, you're not going to go to like the prom and all that, but you're definitely ahead of the curve with a lot of other people.
Yeah.
I
Zach, what were
mean,
you saying?
I never went to prom, and I'm kind of glad,
I didn't
and
either.
kind of, yeah. And kind of, I mean, yeah, I guess it's something that it's a memory, but oh well, it's a memory I don't have. Who
Well,
cares?
here's what's funny about that too. Just thinking about it from a cultural perspective, whenever there is a movie that's made about kids that are in high school, it's always about like the prom or the football games or the social
Yep.
aspect or the band or whatever. It's never about kids learning, which I think says a lot about the priorities that people have when they send their kids to high school. You know what I'm saying? And so
Hmm.
I think culturally there's something to that. And yeah, and it would be great if we could really think about what the education system is supposed to provide, which is just an education, and really focus on making sure that the system does that and only that very well.
Yeah. One thing before I got on that little tangent, though, question that I had was, do they even teach civics anymore?
Oh,
Because it
dude.
doesn't seem like we really do anymore.
Well, like I said, No Child Left Behind was the killer of social studies and science
Mm,
instruction and public education, because it's not like,
yeah.
they do have end of year tests in Kentucky, but I think they only do it 3 times throughout a student's career for social studies content. So they just don't put any
Hmm.
effort or money into it. Again, a lot of this depends on who you get as a teacher. I know a lot of social studies teachers that teach social studies because they want to be a coach, and so they went to school, got their certs in social studies, and they're only really in it for the coaching, and they don't do a good job of teaching social
Hmm.
studies curriculum in the classroom. Now, I was fortunate enough in high school that I had some incredible social studies teachers who were also coaches, but these social studies teachers that I had actually knew what they were talking about. Like, they read books, and so like they were
Hmm.
informed. The other problem with social studies education is that it's pretty much ubiquitous within like the higher education side of public education, like teacher training schools. When you get your master's degree or
Hmm.
whatever, that you have to be dual certified. So generally you'll be certified in like math or language arts, or you'll be certified in science or language arts or whatever it might be. And so the reality is that like a lot of people will get dual certified in social studies, meaning that they've had a couple of high school classes on it, but that wasn't their primary certification. Well, everyone wants to go into math and language arts. That's where the majority of the certifications are for. And so you have these people whose
Hmm.
real interest are in a subject area that's not social studies, teaching social studies classes simply because they were certified in there. And so they don't know what they're talking about when they get into the classroom. So, and then on top of that, you have states like Kentucky that are averse to any sort of political controversy in the classroom. So they make it very difficult to teach basic civics. And it's amazing how like many of my kids come to my 7th grade classroom not even knowing how to like read a map. They don't know how many states are in the United States, can't locate Kentucky on a map. It's crazy how little they know, but
Hmm.
it's because they don't promote that in the education system. But part of me is a little conspiratorial. It makes sense that the administration that illegally invaded 2 countries and started the never-ending war on terror would also want to marginalize social studies instruction, because if kids are asking big questions about like the morality of taxation, the nature of the Constitution, John Locke and natural rights, and all of these things,
Hmm.
well, then they wind up coming to conclusions that threaten the public school bureaucracy. So it makes perfect sense that the public school bureaucrats wouldn't want our kids thinking about these complex issues, because it's a threat to their power. And I don't know any other way to read that than it. So yeah, I would say that the state of civics education is pretty terrible. And I would say that if you happen to live in a very progressive state like Illinois, New York, or California, it's probably worse than that. It's probably all state indoctrination, teaching you to think about the state as the only provider of these resources in society, and that's bad too. So I guess that was a long way of answering your question, and the answer to that question is no. They don't really teach civics in school anymore.
Which is sad
Yeah.
because
Oh,
we
dude,
need
yeah,
it.
yeah.
Yeah.
And kids are
Just a little bit.
yeah, and kids are interested in
Yeah.
it too. Like we have, and I'm always like, if kids are asking me, and I don't show my, like, I'm not like an activist teacher, so I don't tell my kids I'm a libertarian or anything like that. But like, I will have kids that ask questions about like, well, how do we pay for these schools? How do taxes work? Things, and then I start explaining it to them, and they're all really interested in it. Like, they're
Hmm.
actually interested in understanding how these mechanics work. I had a very long conversation with one of my classes just last week about the Constitution and what it was designed to do, and how really it was a compact of the states, and that's where and like, they like learning about this stuff because it's exciting to them, but they're not going
Hmm.
to get it unless they have one of those rare teachers that knows what they're talking about and really cares and is passionate about these issues. It's sad to see, because you see that spark as they learn about these
Yeah.
things for the first time, but then we can't talk about it with them any more than that, and that's really sad.
Hmm.
Well, another
And a
thing to
lot of
think
it's
about.
just
I'm
I was
sorry.
going to say a lot of it has more to do with just time, because you have all this on the lesson plan that you got to teach, and then they get you, then you see the spark of the little snippet that you're giving them, but then you got to move on.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Well,
go on,
another
Andrew.
thing to think about is you was talking about dual certifications earlier, right? Why don't we have it so that you have two options, two routes to take? You can go the traditional route through education, and then you also have the option for apprenticeship, and you can maybe experience one for a while and then one for the other part of the year, and then try to make a decision on which one seems more natural to you, and maybe have a psychological understanding of who you are as a person, kind of help guide that as well.
Yeah, and again, the more we decentralize power, the greater the options are for the taxpayers that are sending their kids to these schools. And I think we need as many options as possible. Again, it's like you have to have a market, you have to have market competition to see what's effective and to see what consumers actually want. And absent that competition, you're never going to be able to provide the service to the public that they really need. And I think that's a great idea.
One aspect is that we just need to get rid of the subsidy as well, not
Yeah.
just government interference, but you see a lot of the subsidy and the incentive for all schools, whether it's homeschool associations, whether it's charter schools, whether it's Catholic schools, whatever, what have you. It's all subsidized in some standard because everybody is collectively going off of some basis of federal. Especially now, federal uh, systems of assessment. Sadly,
The
at least that's
the
what
way the
I
money
remember.
flows.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it
So,
is.
And
in reality, I think we should have a more basis of like Khan Academy.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, it's a spiraling system, right? It's a revolving door because of the way that our election systems operate. Is every 4 years, especially on the federal level. You know, there's always gonna be, oh, we'll just bite our tongue, and they'll fix it for us, but we're never actually fixing the problem. They're just they're bailing us out every year, and it's
so
just
like the border.
kicking us down the toilet. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's it. And that's why we need people at the local level to be engaged. We need libertarians to run for school board, and that's really the
Hmm.
only way that we're ever going to be able to fix this. But I completely agree with what you guys are saying. I mean, I think when it comes to public schools, it's like anything else. It's a very novel, but it should be a very not novel. It should be a very common sense idea, but it's one that many people like fundamentally reject, unfortunately. But it's just that people should not be forced to pay for a good or service they don't use. So if you
Hmm.
want to send a kid to school, then you should have to pay for it. And if you can't pay for it, then you should have the social capital to have somebody else come along and voluntarily give you a scholarship in order to send your kids to school. And that's like the most effective way of funding these schools. We shouldn't force anyone to pay for something they're not using. And until we get to a place in American culture where people begin to think like that about every issue, like systematically and philosophically, then it's going to be really hard to convince them that we can make these changes. But ultimately, I think Trump term 2 is probably going to be a failure, and we're going to wind up being disappointed with the results. But I think the culture has changed in a really positive way, and I don't see the culture going
Hmm.
back to a time and a place where we just accept the dictates of the government without asking any questions. And so hopefully in the long run, more and more people will begin to realize that we just can't put our trust in these political institutions, and we'll start figuring out ways to make them better or even abolish or opt out of them.
Well, the amount of volume from all the activity and noise that's coming from Washington, especially considering, like you said, with Trump administration, that is definitely an indicator of a shift in momentum. So we're hoping for the best, but just any victory is a good victory. It doesn't matter how small.
Yeah, I totally
So
agree.
we should go to war with Russia because
Yes.
Washington would be done.
Yes, and
Well,
China and
And
Iran,
and
all of them,
and Iraq.
at the same time. And Yemen, let's go ahead and declare war on the
I'm
Houthis.
I'm pro war now, guys.
There we
I
go.
like it.
Oh,
I'm invading Antarctica next week.
yes. Well, boys, this has been a lot of fun today, guys. I really appreciate you guys doing this. This has been a blast.
Oh,
Thank
thank
you
you
for
for
joining us.
coming together with us. So we needed to do this.
Yeah, and man, anytime you guys want to get together and rip on some more stuff like this, I enjoy this.
Let's do it.
Hey,
Let's
well,
do it.
before I let you guys go, I want to give you an opportunity again to promote your podcast. Like, where are people that are listening to this? Where can they find your stuff?
Well, you can find the Legacy Right everywhere, pretty much. Anywhere that you listen to your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, Spreaker, anywhere, everywhere. Find us on YouTube. You can find us on Rumble. And then we go live with our Legacy News segment Monday through Wednesday at 5 p.m. YouTube and X, Twitch as well if you want to find us there. And then
On Thursday,
we go live.
we're on the World Blockchain Roundtable every
Yep.
Thursday at 11 a.m. Eastern.
So Thursday you can find me and Andrew on the World Blockchain Roundtable, also X and YouTube at 11 a.m. And then we go live with the Legacy Right in our weekly Legacy series every Friday at 11 a.m. Eastern. Everybody, Eastern. I forgot time zones.
Yes.
Bloody time zones.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And for those of you guys that are listening on the Legacy Right, my podcast is the Protestant Libertarian Podcast. I got new episodes on Thursdays and then usually every other Thursday. We'll see if I can continue to maintain that schedule here. There's a good chance you'll be hearing this on the Legacy Right before you hear it on my show. But if you want to follow me on Twitter, it's at ProLibertyPod. You can find my show pretty much everywhere that podcasts are available. So, gentlemen, this has been a lot of fun today.
Thank you very much for having us. Thank you for joining us.
Yep.